Right, so Michael, tell us a little bit about yourself. So you're Michael Laufer?
Yes.
And, yeah, please. So what do you do?
Should I take this, or are we sharing?
I can hold it for you.
Okay.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I'm chief spokesman for the Four Thieves Vinegar Collective. We build open source tools for people to build DIY technologies, medical technologies, and medicines. Yeah.
Interesting. What's the could that lead to that? Suddenly in my head, I was like thinking about garden shed tinkering and creating these sort of biological bots. Is it along those lines, or am I too sci-fi?
It's not too sci-fi. I mean, that's out on the edge. We started by building an open source chemical reactor so that people can do chemistry on their own, because many pharmaceuticals are small molecules, and so doing the chemistry is doable. But of course, there's a stigma against science. Oh, it's hard. It's only for people with degrees, and oh, you shouldn't mess with that. It's dangerous, and you'll blow yourself up. You'll poison yourself, and of course that's nonsense. But you need something to bridge the gap.
Yeah.
And when you bridge the gap, you have to deal with that stigma, and we dealt with that in a lot of technologies. In the 80s, everybody was afraid of computers, but now everybody has one in their pocket, and one on their lap, and one on their desk. And similarly, maybe half a dozen years ago, rapid prototyping was something that occurred only in niche, specialized industries, and now 3D printing is just a word that we throw around. And what bridged the gap in those cases? In both cases, it was that there was a little bit of automation to take care of the things that are tedious, repetitive, easy to screw up, and there was a good user interface. That was basically it. If you look at the difference between, an old school Unix machine and a Mac, that's basically it. And if you look at the difference between, a UV gel laser 3D printer and a MakerBot, that's basically it. And so we tried to do the same thing with the chemistry. And then we did something similar with the EpiPen, but that was just repurposing things that were lying around. Here's an injector, here's a needle, here's a syringe. This really shouldn't be that hard to do yourself. And more recently, we're starting to deal with biological things, because the most expensive medicines in the world are biologicals. And there are new therapies that come out of biotech that not that tricky to make if you get a little help and a little instruction. So we're working in that direction. We have the one that we're excited about in terms of biotech is that the most common infectious disease in humans is dental caries, cavities. That's actually an infectious disease because it's caused by a substrain of strep, Streptococcus mutans, which has evolved to be able to grab the surface of the human tooth. Most bacteria can't do that, but it can do that, and it excretes lactic acid. Lactic acid, of course, breaks down your tooth enamel. When your tooth enamel breaks down, it sets up shop for a whole bunch of other organisms to come and rot your tooth out. And of course, once you have a tooth infection, a million other things go wrong with your body. So wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have those anymore? Well, it's entirely possible, and the technology's on the shelf. Anything that's an infectious disease, you should be able to inoculate against. Problem is, you can only inoculate against a bacterium before you have it. Infants get this in their first year of life, so there have been some studies, there has been done, it was efficacious, but it's not out there. So what do you do with the rest of us who already have this in our mouth? Well, some clever guys, 20 years ago, mind you, grabbed some of this bacteria and they modified it genetically. They made two modifications. They made it excrete a antibiotic that kills regular strep, strep mutans specifically, but it's immune to it. So you put it in an ecosystem where it's there, and it will take the spot in the ecosystem of the original strep mutans and outcompete it. And then they did a second edit where they took the open reading frame from the gene that says produce lactic acid, and instead it produces alcohol dehydrogenase, which doesn't break down your teeth. And so if you have this bacteria, you can just brush your teeth with it for 3 minutes and never get another cavity for the rest of your life.
So that's something you can put in your toothpaste? Is it that level yet?
You just have to do it once.
Oh, right, and that's it.
Just
You're inoculated
once.
forever.
Forever.
Yeah.
Now, why do we not have access to this? Why aren't we all doing this? Well, it was never approved by the FDA, and it's genetically modified, so it's the intellectual property of the Hillman lab. And you know, if Hillman's out there and he wants to give it to us, like, we'd love to have it. We're trying to build it from scratch, however, and we've given the raw materials to a bunch of biohacking groups.
Open source.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, pirated. Like,
much better.
I mean, it's important to differentiate, right? If we had developed it, we'd be, you know, putting it around open source, but it was developed by somebody else and it's not available. So we're, you know, essentially creating it from scratch, and we're hoping that we can just give it away. And the wonderful thing about biological material is that it's very similar to software in that if I have some, I can make as many copies as I want. I just dip in a little loop, streak another plate, and streak as many as I want, and it just grows because it's bacteria. And then I can send it out to everybody I know, and they can do the same thing. They can send it to everybody they know. And hopefully nobody in the world will ever have another cavity, because we shouldn't have to deal with illness ever.
Yeah.
Let's cure them all.
Yes.
That's a great point that you bring up, that bacteria are in that sense similar to software, that they are non-scarce goods, right? A scarce good is something that only one entity can have ownership over. And for example, if you have that bottle or the cup, I want to have some, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Now you no longer have it, right?
Right.
And
however, if I make you a copy of some bacteria, I don't lose any by making a copy for you. It's what is the Thomas Jefferson quote? If I light your candle with mine, it does not make mine dimmer.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And the beautiful thing about that is we do not need private property, because there is no conflict over who can own and control this stuff. Because there is no private property, there is no free exchange. And because there is no free exchange, there are no prices. So therefore, these non-scarce goods, like software, like bacteria, should be free and gratis.
Can I stay here forever? I want it to be this obvious to everybody, and I'm really hopeful that it will become more obvious as these ideas proliferate, and that we're not just a bunch of crazies who are having like a party in Prague, and then people are like, oh yeah, you nutcases, and instead it's like, oh yeah, that really obvious thing that everybody didn't realize for, you know, centuries. Forever. Because, you know, people were making too much money.
And am I right in thinking that, or remembering, if that's the right word, that most of like the test cells that we have came from someone in like the 50s? That they just keep on.
Oh, for a specific thing, for I believe, yeah, I'm trying to remember, but I believe that's for cancer research.
Right. Yeah.
But there was one person, and they've been proliferating those cells for like, you know, 60, 70 years or something. Yeah. And there are plenty of cases like that. Like, you know, so many bacteria, right? They're just clones. So if you get a copy, you know you have the exact same thing. But you want to order it from a service, like, it's going to cost you a tremendous amount. And why is it going to cost you a tremendous amount? Because they know as soon as they give it to you, you can make as much as you want. Yeah. And so you're going to pay through the nose for it. So if you run a biohacking space and you would like a copy of JH 1140 Strep mutans Clark, which is edited, right?
Give it to your family for Christmas.
Now, this does not have the edit in it, but if you have the technology to edit a gene, and you need the raw materials of the precursor that has been edited to outcompete, write to us through the website, and we'll send it to you.
And what website is that?
fourthievesvinegar.org. We also have an Onion site if you're paranoid. I can't recite it, but it's
come on.
But it's on the other website. So come visit us. Say hi.
And you mentioned earlier about the kind of the fear of computers when they first came in, and the people's understanding around that. I'm quite a sciencey type guy, and it bugs me when I see food that says no chemicals, because it kind of says it's all made of chemicals. What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, I think that's a great example of the stigma of science, right? There's this dangerous separation of information and understanding, and that's a cultural problem. We have this difficulty where people will take an idea and they will take sort of like a grab baggy version of it, right? Oh, chemicals are bad. Okay, have you defined what that is? Right, we have sort of this heuristic idea of like, oh, chemicals meaning things like solvents or pesticides or something toxic that doesn't occur in nature. And yet, the proper term chemical just means something with a molecular structure, right? Which is sort of, right? Oh my God, it's everywhere! Right, and so it's and I think that the sort of the dangerous culture of anti-intellectualism plays into that a lot, where it's, oh, I want a rule of thumb. I'm going to read a headline but not, read the article, to say nothing of checking the sources of the article, to say nothing of, looking at the papers on which that was based or analyzing the study, which, anybody can do. They're just afraid to. And again, I think that so many things are like that. The difficulty, of course, comes in what I call the de-skilling cycle. So often we have some sort of technology like cryptocurrency, like PGP, like biotech, any of these things that sciencey types think of as like, oh yeah, well, anybody can do that. Yeah. Right, sure. Yeah, I do that on a Friday night after I've had a lot of absinthe. But to a regular person, they're like, oh, isn't that like weird and dangerous and stuff? And there's this gap. So normally, what happens is that the industrious sciencey types say, I'm going to build a stopgap. I'm going to create a technology that's going to allow people to have access to this without having to be all sciencey about it. And we feel really great about ourselves, and we proliferate that technology, and then as we do, the next thing that happens is that they become dependent on our technology, and we're back where we started. And this is very difficult. I remember I just told this story in my talk. I remember I was part of a hackerspace back in the US, and I came in, and one of the guys who was a regular fixture was on the phone. He was really mad, and I said, "What's the deal?" He says, "Dude, I've been on hold with tech support at MakerBot for 2.5 hours." And I thought, we've lost the war. Because the whole point was that we're no longer subject to manufacturing infrastructure. This was going to make us all independent. And now the dependency has just shifted from one institution to another. Like, is it smaller? Is it less, parasitic? Maybe. But is that really progress or not? And so I think we all need to take a deep breath and think very carefully about how, when we set up technologies, that we can try to avoid that trap. Oftentimes people say, what's your end goal for the Four Thieves Vinegar Collective? And I say, to no longer exist. Which always takes people by surprise, because they're like, well, don't you want to build an empire? No, we're an anarchist collective and we'd like to not exist anymore. The idea being that if we develop technology to a beta stage and then we release it into the open source world, then it can be taken up by the open source community and people will build better versions of it. People will utilize it in ways we hadn't thought of before. People will take it and they will utilize it for things we hadn't considered. They will have, they'll develop new technology on top of it, and then DIY automated chemistry will just be another word. Hopefully there'll be a better word for it by then, right? And it'll be like, oh, I need some blank. Well, oh, cool. Let's download a recipe for it and we'll just cook it up at home. Because it shouldn't be that you say, oh, yeah, well, let's hope that Four Thieves comes out with a recipe for that. That shouldn't be it. It should be like, well, let's figure a way to crank that out. Let's write a recipe for that. And so breaking de-skilling cycles is really, really critical in my mind.
So it's kind of like how Satoshi threw the ball up in the air and now the community keeps it up in the air forever.
Right. I think it's a great example. You know, how many zillions of cryptocurrencies are out there? And that came out of one paper that one guy threw out there. And I think that's boom! Yeah, you know, and props wherever you are.
She is.
And, you know, and I'd like to see more things like that happen where people develop robust protocols and release them and say, I think it's a good idea, you can run with it. I'm not pushing it, though, which I think is really, really important. Oftentimes, mainstream journalists will say, hey, can you introduce us to somebody who's using your technology? And I was like, And they're like, well, you won't? I was like, well, I don't know them. And they're like, how can you not be connected with your end users? And I said, they're not my end users, they're people. And those people make a decision as to whether they want to use our technology or not. Maybe they think it's a bad idea. It's about personal choice. That's the whole thing. We put the technology out there. We're not saying don't go to the doctor. We're not saying don't go to the hospital. We're saying, look, you should have options. And if the medical infrastructure fails you, you should have choices besides going, well, I guess I'll wait to die.
So do you see the FDA seeing what you're doing as a threat in any way, that people could, you know, that they could take it out of context, or at least the public, and then, you know, kind of get into this?
I think they take it in context and they think I'm, you know, doing dangerous things. I mean, seriously, they came out when the EpiPencil, which was our sort of most famous project to date, which was just a side project. We weren't going to do it, and people just kept bugging us through the website. Hey, why haven't you done something? And we're like, well, it's kind of not what we do. They're like, well, you should. And finally we said, okay, well, let's do that. The FDA came out and said, you know, don't make your own EpiPen. They didn't name us specifically, but we know you meant us. So that said, yeah, and I don't think they took it out of context. I think they didn't have any illusions. Most people that I've consulted with legally have said, you should put up for informational purposes only. And I was like, I'm not doing that. It's not for informational purposes. I mean, it is, right? Information is good, but it's not only for that. It's, you have 10 minutes to live if you get an injection of epinephrine or not. You should be able to do that yourself and not be held up in the woods for, you know, $600 for a pair, especially given that it's $1 for the medication, $1 for the needle in the syringe, and $30 for the reloadable auto-injector. Like, come on. This is ridiculous. And I'm not going to say, don't try this at home. Try it at home. I tried it at home. It's, you know, it's like, it's giving yourself an injection. In terms of safety, it's about as safe as it gets. So, I think we haven't been hit directly because industry and government don't see us as enough of a threat yet. I think once we are a little more successful, or hopefully, once we become a little more successful, I'm not hoping that they come after me. I'm hoping we become more successful, just to clarify my language. That it's only a matter of time before something comes down, which is why most of the members of the collective operate, you know, under a shroud of anonymity, and, you know, I'm the public face because that's my job.
Will we ever solve death? Will we live forever?
I don't know. I mean, and this is an important thing to note. There's a lot of technical aspects of the project. There's hardware coding and software coding, and there's chemistry, and there's medicine, and there's biotech, and I'm not an expert in any of these things. Now I know enough that I'm able to have the conversations with the experts within the field within the collective. And so I can call or message one of the doctors and say, hey, what do you think about this technology? Or is there anything on the shelf for this ailment that seems to be, or anything where there's good research but has not made it to the shelf yet? And I can have an intelligent conversation with them and then try and package that and work with the other members to develop something. But I'm not an expert in any of these things. My background's in mathematics and high energy physics, none of which are applicable, except that, scientific method, maybe. Right? So in terms of anti-aging stuff, I mean, I had a nice chat with Aubrey de Grey at one point. He's a really sweet guy. It seems not impossible, but my position, and I wrote a piece for Wired Italy where I said, we can't wait for the promise of the future. And that I think is important, because the futurists often sell us on this idea of like, hey, checks in the mail, right around the corner. Just you wait. Mitochondrial disease, thing of the past. Everything's gonna be cool. We're all gonna live forever, and we're gonna be stronger and faster and smarter and cool. Maybe that'll happen at one point, but there shouldn't be just this hope of like, okay, well, maybe things will be leverageable enough, so I'll live long enough that the researchers will get to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and like, it's entirely plausible. I think his argument is good, assuming all of those pieces fall into place, which I think are a lot of ifs. And notably, the futurists in the 50s were predicting the same thing, and things haven't shifted a whole lot in the interim. So for me, not that I think it's an unworthy pursuit, I think it's something that we should look at. We all enjoy life, or at least I do, and okay. I hope everybody enjoys. I think maybe that's a problem we should look into more. Everybody enjoying life a little more, and then we can be like, well, then for those who enjoy life, let's have more of it. But yes, first maybe let's have more life in our years than years in our life. That said, I think that at the moment, the thing that's most critical to look at is how do we take the things that are on the shelf and make sure that people can actually get them? Because it says something very sad about the state of humanity when we take so much time and energy to develop these medical technologies and then we refuse to deliver them. I mean, there's so many things from which people suffer needlessly just because of intellectual property law, and I'd like to see that become extinct.
Yeah.
Like later today, like not after lunch or not tomorrow, but like now.
Yeah. Like Martin Shkreli, and how he pumped the prices 600% or something like that.
It went from $13.50 a pill to $750 a pill for a 50 milligram pill. Yeah, so, and that was something that we manufactured on stage for, so we made a quadruple dose, which is 200 milligrams, so that would equate to a $3,000 pill for less than 25 cents. And I was throwing handfuls into the crowd, which was fun. And then we called his cell phone when he wasn't in jail.
Nice.
And now we've written to him in jail. He hasn't written back yet.
But when you think about that, so the legal implications of, it's like you're letting someone suffer or die for the sake of profit, essentially, and how come that isn't morally apprehensible?
It's worse than that. It's worse than that. It's not just letting somebody die for profit. It's letting somebody die because you won't share an idea.
Yeah.
It's like you'd never, if somebody were dying in front of you and you had an idea on how to save them, you'd never say, "Hey, I know how you could live, but not going to tell you because that's my idea." Like, yeah, like nobody would ever do that. Nobody would ever do that, and yet all of us do that every day because we're complicit in allowing that system of intellectual property to persist while people drop dead from curable diseases endlessly because intellectual property law allows for control of these things. I mean, when when you take a step back and see what's occurring, it's so patently bizarre. No pun, but but it's so weird. It's so strange, and yet it's one of these things that's just accepted because it's been that way for a long time, and it just slowly evolved this way. And you know, not unlike currency or statehood. It's like so strange to think about these sorts of things. Like, well, what is a country? Well, a country is a place where a certain group has a monopoly on coercive force, and you're like, what?
Sounds great. When you describe it like that.
Yeah, or you think of currency, and it's like somebody describes it again in abstract terms, and you're like, who came up with that?
Yeah.
Like, and yet these institutions are just ingrained, and because there's a sort of inertia of social structure, we just kind of be like, well, here we are, and some of us are being like, pardon me, over here, I have some thoughts. Maybe it couldn't be terrible if we just did things a little differently.
Yeah. So do you think that on a large scale, right, we see open source software is winning, we see open source currency is winning, do you think that we will see open source medicine winning?
Yeah.
Fuck yeah.
Fuck yeah. And we damn well better, because if we don't, things will become worse. And they're becoming worse, and we're seeing that happen. And again, when you talk about open source software, when you talk about open source currency, the thing that allowed the shift was a social change. It was the perception. Bitcoin was under the radar forever, and it was just a couple of us crazies who were pushing weird little hashes around, and oh, you guys with your little bit whatevers, oh, ha ha ha, and and then everybody lost their minds when they're like, what, it's worth $18,000 now? And some of us are being like, yeah. and then people are like, well, are you going to cash that in for money? And some of us are like, no. Try this again. That is my money, right? And they're like, wait, but don't you want to cash that in? It's like, no.
The buck stops there.
It's not a commodity. We're not trading for it. That is currency. And then finally, when people are starting to get it, they're like, oh, you mean it doesn't have all of these horrible trappings that I've been dealing with my whole life? And the same thing with software, right? Where people are like, so what's the deal? You just make software and you give it away? That's real cute. Aren't you a humanitarian? It's like, no, we're trying to build better things, and this is how it works. It's like, yeah, but how are you ever going to make any money? And it's kind of like, we're going to have to have this discussion again. And the same, right, you're still in that same cycle. We're still in the infancy of that when talking about saying, people are like, Jesus, did you just take a Tylenol? You should maybe talk to a doctor before you do that. And it's like, maybe you should talk to a doctor about why you're so scared to do anything for yourself. Maybe a different kind of doctor, right? And it's like, it's a cultural shift. We need to get to a point where the first urge that somebody has when they're ill is to say, well, I should learn about this. Not, oh, I'm going to go and ask an expert to tell me what to do, and I will take their advice on faith. Yeah. And instead, what we should be doing is saying, well, maybe I should be invested in my own health, rather than saying, I'm going to wait until things are so bad that I can't function in my daily life, and then go to a so-called expert and be like, bail me out. And it's the same thing. It's like, cool, maybe you could learn how your computer works instead of being like, something's amiss. I'll go to the Genius Bar and push it across the desk and be like, make it work. Yeah, I think my sound card's broken, and they hit the unmute button, and they're like, here, right?
$100 please, $100 please.
Right, yeah. That same sort of thing, right. And you're intentionally letting you're giving yourself over to be a hostage, and health is so critical. Yeah. You can do without a computer you can do without a 3D printer. If you don't have your health, there's not much else that you can really do. If you're laid up health-wise, like, you're sort of stuck.
But one of the I think the issues with that, about people taking that power back, is that, like, the internet is great in terms of, you know, this spreading of it, disseminating of good information, but at the same time, bad information disseminates faster and, like, more, you know.
It's a huge issue.
Yeah.
It's a huge issue. Learning to filter information is extraordinarily critical. The one place where this is a little bit safer is looking at Sci-Hub, where you can get just about any scientific paper without having to go through Elsevier or any of those other processes. You can actually just go and get the original studies on which whatever clickbaity garbage you were reading was originally based on. And if you develop the skill, it is a skill, but it's not hard to acquire, of reading a scientific paper, then you can look at original research and compare original research and ask yourself, was this good? Is this something that should be done? Does this make sense? Is this something that I should look at in terms of trying to manage my own health? Or is this something that was highly experimental and it worked only in some very, very edge cases and not a lot of people tried it?
Study.
Yeah, and getting access to primary source scientific information is critical. And it's one of the things I think that is allowing a number of people who are now actively taking charge of their health to be able to do so. And to the woman who runs Sci-Hub in the former USSR, you are a wonderful human being, and we need more people like you in the world. And thank you for everything you do. We at the Four Thieves Vinegar Collective use your service every day, and we appreciate you in perpetuity. And everybody out there who hasn't seen Sci-Hub, go there. You can read any scientific paper that's behind a paywall for free. And for anybody who has Bitcoin, please send it to Sci-Hub.
Donate. Yeah.
That's the only donation mechanism that she has. Send her all your Bitcoins.
It's also the best donation mechanism. Come on, guys.
Yeah, and it's the most deserving place I know of. I mean, I'm sure there are others, but like, if somebody said, "Hey, you've won this trivia contest, and we're gonna send 80 Bitcoins to the charity of your choice," I'd be like, Sci-Hub, send them all there, no questions asked. So.
Awesome. Just one thing I was actually thinking, going back to the whole chemicals in food. I remember a post circulated around Facebook, and someone had put an apple, and I think it referenced a site that had an apple in every chemical. And
God, how long was that list?
It was huge. But you know what the hilarious thing was? Even though the meme kind of still said this, these are the chemicals that make up an apple, there were people who were furious saying, "We need to take these chemicals out of the apple."
Oh yeah. Oh sure. Right. Yeah, that's gonna work. Yeah, no, and it's and again, there's that danger, and it's easy for us to sort of have a laugh at those poor people's expense because they misunderstand it, but in reality, I think we all need to take responsibility for the fact that those people have been misled, and nobody's stepped in to be like, "Hey, you know what? Science isn't a club. Science is a human right, and you can do it too. There's no barrier. There's no barrier. Oh, scientists go to school. Well, some of them do. Yeah. I mean, some of them don't need to. I recently met this really, really brilliant kid. He's 19 years old, and at age 16, he developed an open source tool that allows, yes, and Nick, I'm thinking of you, man, that allows people who are paralyzed to move again using their brainwaves, right? Off-the-shelf parts, okay? So he uses a TENS unit that stimulates muscle, and he's mapped the extremities so that he has contact points for being able to do specific things. And then he has a machine learning system built into a Raspberry Pi off of a off-the-shelf unit that is an EEG. And what it does is it's just a machine learning unit, and you just train it for 10 minutes, and he has people who haven't moved in 30 years suddenly moving their arm.
That's incredible.
Like, and and he finished high school, but like he didn't need to. And not that school can't be useful. It can be if you utilize it correctly, and if it's for you. It might not be. He asked me about higher education because I teach at a university, but he's like, what do you think? And I'm like, yeah, you can do it, but think about why. Think about what you're going to get from it. You're already a scientist. You don't need letters after your name. And certainly there are the people who are like, well, where did you go to school? And it's like, do you want to know what I have on the wall or what I can do? And I'm weird because like I have stuff on the wall and people take me seriously for it, which they shouldn't. Because it doesn't relate to most of the things that I do in life. I am a mathematician and I do teach, math. I'm chair of a math department. So that's relevant. But when people are like, oh, Dr. Laufer, yeah, you do medical stuff. And I'm like, don't take me seriously because there's doctor before my name. Not that kind of doctor. And so, and I think that's a critical thing.
So we should replace certificates on the wall with electronic counters of how many people you've helped. As in you, as in the royal you and the science community.
Blockchain that.
Blockchain that. I think you need to know ICO.
I think it's simpler than that, right? I mean, we can over-engineer it from here to forever, but in a simpler sense, it's like, do you know what you're doing? Do you know what you're talking about? Cool. That's an easy thing to check. Yeah. Right? Fine. There are plenty of people who went to top schools and have PhD, MD, whatever, and they're yahoos. And like, yeah, you really should be accountable not by the institutions which validate you, but rather by those things which you manage to assist with. And that's what we should all aspire to is making the world better, even in the most selfish case, right? For, when people are like, whoa, why should I help the world? I just want, my life to be better. It's like, cool, this world, this is the one you live in. Wouldn't you like it to be better just from the most selfish perspective possible? Yeah. Wouldn't it be nicer if you lived in a world where things sucked less? I mean, sure, yeah, you could be predatory and try and make things better for yourself, but like ultimately that's not the best thing for yourself, even in the short term. I mean,
that is life. Life is in a sense suffering, right? We live in a perpetual state of uneasiness. And our task is with human ingenuity to remove this uneasiness, to make life just a little bit better with every step.
And the thing that you see, or that I see, in just about every institution which has ever been founded was there was a push to try to do that. And eventually it was bastardized, right? And religious movements are a great example, right? You look at the roots of any religious movement, and the whole idea was like, hey, maybe we could be a little nicer to each other for a change. And then eventually it was like, cool, we're building power hierarchy again. And, and we're laying down rules again. And it's like, yeah, no, think for yourself, stay hungry, stay foolish, transform the future. Be good to each other, because why not? And it'd be nice to see more of that. It would really be nice to see more of that.
It would. And we're glad that we have you fighting for our side and fighting towards liberty.
Yeah, and everybody else who's doing it, because, I'm not the first, I won't be the last, and there are so many more. And there are so many more fronts on which it has to occur. And it was so inspiring to see so many people looking for ways to transform things. Whether they work or not, just the fact that there's an attempt, that the idea is out there, eventually somebody's going to find a way to subvert existing legal systems and to subvert statehood and develop new models for travel and borders. All of these things are incredible problems which need to be addressed. health was the one that hit me the hardest, just emotionally, and I needed to do something about it. But, you know, there are any number of things which need to be addressed. And I'm so glad to see so many people trying so hard with so many things. And I think the most important thing, which is often overlooked, is that guarantee of success should not be a requisite for trying. So often I see people saying, that'll never work. Okay, that's fine. It doesn't mean that that's a lack of progress that they're trying it. That doesn't mean that that's failure. That's progress. They tried something and they didn't work, and now we have more data. We understand the system better. We have a greater appreciation for the structure on a subtler level of the ecosystem. We need to do that. That's how we learn. That's how we learn. That's how we evolve systems. And so when somebody says, oh yeah, well that didn't work, in this derisive way, I say, hang on. Who else tried that? Oh, they were the first to try that? It didn't work? Cool. We learned a lot. We know something that doesn't work when we're trying to accomplish that. Thank you. And I think that there needs to be a much greater appreciation for people who attempt things and are not hindered by the idea that it didn't cause the grand revolution that they were dreaming of when they started. Like it never does. No revolution. You know, Cuba, South Africa, China, it doesn't matter. Any of these things that you look at, yeah, they went south. God, how important was that for us to learn from? And how much better can the next iteration be? And, you know, cryptocurrency, health, statelessness, all of these things. How can we do better?
Awesome. Yeah, I think we didn't kind of get to the human race didn't get to this this state by or get where we are without altruism, and we needed to succeed and move forward, and you know we need to unite more rather than you know dividing more.
Yeah, there are countless examples of that, and I think people often, you know, get hung up with glory. It's easy to. Everybody remembers Gandhi. Nobody remembers Bhagat Singh. And yet, you sort of have to ask, right? And people will say, well, what he did fail. Well, did it? Or is what you call failure actually progress because there was a change and then things had to, the structure adjusted. You know, people look at in the U.S., the Weather Underground, say, well, they failed. Well, did they? Think of all the things, and you know, people would think, oh, they were a terrorist organization. They did terrible. They threw bombs. Yeah, they did. You know, and that caused a lot of people to think differently. And the pressure about the Vietnam War changed when they said bring the war home, and they were creating a front for the Viet Cong inside the U.S. fought by Americans. And everybody's like, they were just a bunch of crazies. Well, okay, but what they did was non-zero, and that did change the way people think about things. And suddenly there was a structural change. And yeah, okay, so those people aren't famous. Maybe I'm the only one who knows about, you know, who really cares about Bernardine Dorn or, you know, Bill Ayers and Mark Rudd as heroes, and now they're just people who are working in local politics where they live. But what they did change things. Just because it's not visible and they're not famous and they don't have, you know, schools named after them doesn't mean what they did was insignificant. And I think that there are, you know, I think all my heroes are unsung. And I think there are many here who will remain unsung. And I think that that's okay. And they need, you know, people need to make peace with the fact that they may be a hero that nobody will ever know about. And that doesn't mean that their work is not critical. And to all of the people out there who will never be known, thank you.
Yeah.
I know you're out there.
Much, yeah, definitely.
And you know, the information that we say should be open source. It should be shared freely. This can only be given away, right? This is knowledge. Information is knowledge. You as an individual have to sit down and try to understand this information. And this is an internal process, right, with your thoughts, heart, and gut. This is something that only you can do by yourself. But even then, you have only understood it. Action on that understood knowledge is what brings you wisdom and what makes change manifest in the world. And any action that is in accordance with your thoughts, emotions, and your heart, that is fundamentally a change that will manifest, and it will manifest greatly. Yes, it might be forgotten by those who are currently in present, but the change is still there, and it has been built upon and built upon and built upon. So in that sense, even though these heroes might be forgotten, we still live in a world that has been affected by them, that has been changed by them, and that is what matters.
Permanently. And of course, also when you talk about information, there's a subtle point which people will, suggest is philosophical hair splitting, but there's this important difference between information and knowledge. Information can be commodified, but knowledge cannot, because it perpetuates, right? That is the source. If you have the understanding, then you can create. You've essentially seized the means of production of knowledge, right? And so you've gone a level deeper. Well, I can sit, and if you're better at chess than I am, you can show me a trick. But if you don't explain why it works, then it's just a trick, and I need to come back to you and say, hey, can you show me another trick? I've run into too many people who know that trick and they know a better trick. But if you instead say, here's the structure of the game, maybe you can just play with it. Then you say, here's a tool, go use it. All of a sudden, then this bubbling spring of information, and I can create as much as I want. And I think that leveraging, that exponential growth that comes from empowering people, not by telling them what to think, but telling them how to think. Tell someone a truth and they will think for a day, but teach someone to reason and they will think for a lifetime. Hopefully. if you teach well enough.
And that is the difference between trivia, just random facts, and the trivium, the true way of learning. So absolutely.
Yeah. And again, I think that it's a cultural shift that we're looking for. Mm-hmm. And if we can get to a point where there's, rather than a culture of anti-intellectualism, there's perhaps a romanticization of intellectualism. If it becomes sexy to be smart and and thoughtful and doing right, yes, and all of you guys are going to get laid like all the time, right?
Oh, really?
Well, we can hope. But if that happens, then there will be, again, that exponential leveraging that you'll see where things will start and people will think more, and then people will try to be able to do more with what they do know, and then they'll be able to build more, and then they'll be able to learn more, and then they'll be able to teach more, and then and we all do better, and there's the upward spiral. Yeah, just play that Nine Inch Nails album backwards, and you get the upward spiral. Maybe. Sorry, didn't you know the downward spiral? Nine Inch Nails bomb. Yeah. Okay. Well, you know.
Yeah, but he's behind camera.
Sorry, some of you out there know the Nine Inch Nails album, the downward spiral. Anyway, yes, upward spiral.
Awesome. Well, yeah. Is there a final message then for everyone?
Take control of your own health. Do not fall victim to outsourcing responsibility. It is so tempting to say that something is the realm of experts, and so it's not your business. Everything you do is your business. And the second that you allow an expert to take that away from you, you have surrendered your power. And you can take it back just as easily by saying, no, I'm going to think about this myself first. It's not to say there's no utility in consulting experts, but be invested in your own health and do not say, I'm just going to wait. Monitor your own health. Be invested in your own health, especially if you're healthy. Check, get blood work done, read the results, decide what you think. Do you think you're healthy? Who cares what anybody else thinks? Decide what you think. And then, adjust as you see fit, and and apply it to every other aspect of your life too. I think about health because that's the realm in which I work, but it applies to everything. Be invested in your own life. Be invested in your own life. What are you doing besides living your life this week? What's more important?
Don't let yourself be represented. Present yourself. Be a sovereign individual, someone who is individed in his actions.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Pleasure's
It really
been mine.
was.
Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thanks ever so much.
And keep up the amazing work.
Thank you so much.
And keep up the good fight.
Yeah, definitely.
Fight hard.